Welcome to Punchline Talks, the big interview. Today, my special guest is Deborah Flint. She's the managing director and co-owner of Cinderhill Farm in St. Breville's in the Forest of Dean. Welcome to Punchline Talks, Deborah.
Lovely to be here, Mark. Thank you.
Now, I've heard about the business for quite some time, but if you could tell me about the company, about Cinderhill Farm, what you do, how long it's been going on, how many people you employ. Can you tell us about it, please?
I can indeed. If I start where we are now, we're a small business based right as far over west as you can get in Gloucestershire, tippling over almost into Wales. We're an 8-acre farm, and we keep pigs and we keep sheep. We make sausage rolls and pasties, which we call oggies. That's because the Welsh word for pasty is an oggie, but we're Forest Wales, we're foggies. And we now employ 16 people, and we make around 10,000 plus items a week, and have a turnover of just over £1 million at the moment.
Wow, congratulations on that as well. And the big news is that you've recently been on the Channel 4 TV Cotswold Farm Shop. How did that come about?
I thought you were going to say the big news is I was on the breakfast here.
That's the other big news.
That's the other big news, yeah. We have been suppliers of Gloucester Services since the day they opened. And that came about because of my history, my family history, based up in Yorkshire. We knew the T-Bay place, and being a local farm, knew that they might well be interested in the products that we're making. So I'd seen Mark Gale proposing for planning permission over a number of years, then saw that they were applying with Westmoreland, and my background in development made me think, very interesting proposition. And so when it all went through, I think I might have waited 2 or 3 days, not very long, to send a letter to go, would you be interested in our products? We just at that time made a range of 2, the wild boar and the plain one. And I think I made something like 200 a week. Wow. And that was it. And they said yes after one bite.
Fantastic. But so you got in obviously into Gloucester Services, and sales must have really rocketed. Was there a marked increase straight away, or was it a slow build?
It was quite interesting actually, because I think the Westmoreland group themselves didn't really understand quite how much Gloucester Services would take off. They had experience in running a service station, but the service station is in a pretty quiet part of the M6. And of course, the M5 down by us is a very busy piece of motorway, but it also has more service stations around it. So, the impact was hard to estimate. And they were only opening northbound first, and then a year later we'll be opening the south. So, when we first started, at some point, the lovely buyer, Alex, who appeared on that programme, said to me, so, Deborah, do you think you're going to be able to produce enough sausage rolls to supply a service station? So I thought about it for a while, and I said, well, you haven't told me yet how many you need. That's a very good question. And he came back and kind of gave me some indicative figures from what they were doing up in T-Bay. And then, Neil and I, my husband and I, ran around the house going, woohoo, woohoo. It would increase tenfold what we were doing at the time in our farm. And that was their estimate at retail. And I think we exceeded that within about 3 months.
Wow.
That's what they thought would be for a year on both sides, and we exceeded it in 3 months on one side.
I was going to say, so when the other side opened, was it like just doubling the amount sold, or was it?
I don't know to what extent that's trade secrets for them, but the two sides I think have a healthy competition between them as to who can turn over the most. And at some point, I recommend that you interview Sarah Dunning, who owns it, and ask her that question.
Well, I've met Sarah a number of times. She's ever so nice. Ever so very obviously clever lady. Knows what she's doing, does she?
Yes, yeah. But I think that for us it did more or less double. Yes, but it's difficult to say because it's just carried on growing. As they've grown, we've grown. So their idea. I remember the very first day. We were there the day before, and then we turned up again on the day and delivered our products. And there was some panic around the place because they hadn't worked out where to find the switches to switch the lights off or on the overhead lights outside in the car park, marvelous things like that. So I really feel like you're in there at the beginning, and it's been lovely to grow with them. They've been very gracious in working with us, supporting us through that, and have really helped us to grow. And in doing so, we've moved from just me to there being 16 of us now working in the business.
Because you make an awful lot of sausage rolls, don't you? Isn't it 500,000 or something?
Last year it was 537,000 something.
Wow. How do you make 500 something odd thousand sausage rolls? Because you do still do them by the hand, don't you?
Yep, every single one's made by hand. And in fact, we've talked recently about what happens if it gets bigger. And one thing we all agree is we don't want to be a factory. We make food with love and with care, and it's made with natural products. So it is it's a flexible, changing product. It doesn't, no two look exactly the same. And I think I'd really miss that. I mean, the kind of environmental health and food standards agency requirements require you to strive for consistency, which I think is good. But anything that's handmade, particularly where it involves pastry and cooking, and you're not going to get a precise shape, because pastry, as any pastry maker knows, is very weather dependent. One day it can be soft, one day it can be rock hard, one day it works really well, another day it doesn't work at all.
Yeah, especially if you're talking puff pastry. Is it puff pastry with your own sort of mix and stuff?
It's a bit like one, but when we would do sort of creating the product for the services, the idea is that you could eat it in a car and not get totally covered in it.
So let's talk about the product then, because you have the different flavors. Are they wild boars? Are they your, the pigs that you grow there on the farm?
No, we don't grow wild boar. We did for a while. They were quite feisty little creatures, and they have ears that go up like this. So our farm is on a real valley. On the other side of the valley is Wales, and their little ears up, so you could see Wales. And it always looks greener in Wales because it rains so much, as we all know, in Wales, doesn't it? So little pigs always want to go wee, 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 down the valley and up the other side. So we're forever having to find them and bring them back. Whereas we have lop-eared British saddlebacks, and they can only see a metre in front of them. Much easier to look after, particularly when you live on a steep slope.
So how many pigs do you have then?
Well, at the moment we've got 2 breeding sows, and the most we've ever had on site is 4. But our steep hillside is too steep to grow too many. We have one of Britain's last remaining proper wildflower meadows, and pigs aren't great. They're good periodically in a meadow, in part of it, to turn it over, but you want to be very careful in terms of the usage of it. When we first came, if I'm honest, we didn't realise the value of the land that we had, ecological value, not the financial value, the economic value of the land. And for example, a local youngster, came and did research into crickets and grasshoppers in ours and other farms nearby. And although we farm with pigs and sheep, we had the second highest variety of grasshoppers and crickets in the area, and some people don't kind of graze them at all. So I was quite proud of that, because when we came it was just improved soil, improved pasture land. So that shows that our conservation farming is really paying off.
Well, let's go back to that actually, because let's start from the very beginning then. How did you and Neil come to own the farm?
Children left home.
Because you're not from around here originally, are you?
We lived in Oxfordshire, Ensham in Oxfordshire, and Neil had a background in IT, venture capital invested startups in IT, and I worked in development work, which is why I was interested in Mark Gale's work, and I worked mainly overseas. My work was to support work mainly overseas, but not entirely. Other projects, including in Bristol and local areas as well. And I was a fundraiser, so I raised funds for development work and taught it. And I was a good fundraiser. I was a very good fundraiser. So when the children were leaving home to go to university, kind of, I'd had enough of traveling. I'd travel, I think the most I ever did was 5 months in a year. That's a lot when you've got a family. One of the trips, memorable one, was 17 flights in 14 days and 47 meetings.
Wow.
And I just needed a rest and a change. So I started doing a PhD looking at whether or not you have better economic sustainability in a community if you invest from within the country than if you invest from outside the country or county. You could look at it both ways. So Mark's way of looking at development and mine have some similarities because, although we are a privately owned business, we run it very much on it has to benefit everybody basis. And we have lots of initiatives that, with a view to benefiting everybody, including ourselves. Everybody should benefit from it in the business. So it's not about, begging for money and then handing it out. It's about building skills base, raising standards in terms of employment. When we moved here, many of the people we were trying to employ were, saying, well, I can get more money working in the pub because they weren't paying tax, national insurance, pension, they weren't getting holiday pay and so forth. So it took a little bit of time to kind of get people in and get them to realise that actually some of the people we brought in, that actually was safe to be properly employed, to have a contract and to pay a pension. From that, you'd get benefits later on,
Is that because it's a more rural background and based in the forest?
The forest has a very different history to it than anything I'd ever seen in this country, but it had some similarities to, very independent, very self-reliant, and self-sustaining in some respects, but at what cost? So when we first came, you couldn't study A-levels in the forest. As somebody doing a high degree, that was a real shock to me. There's 100,000 people here and there was no provision in the forest to do A-levels. So the level of aspiration for youngsters, how do you build that up? We have members of staff who are saying, well, when my child's 16, she'll be going off to uni. She'll be going off to work. Why? You've got a really capable, intelligent daughter there. And for example, that particular one's gone on to do teaching. Because you can raise aspirations, you can raise without really having to be very systematic about it, just by being a friend, a person who cares for not just the employee but also the family that make them who they are.
So the actual business itself, so when did you and Neil, you found this piece of land? How big was it? Was it a rundown farm? Was it?
It was 8 acres. 8 acres, and it hadn't been used as a farm for quite some time. It's very steep, steeper than we really realised, I think, when we bought it.
What year was this? Sorry, what year was this, please, Deborah?
2011, we actually moved in.
Okay.
So 12 years ago, I think, not 12, 2010, 2011. And when we moved here, we had to do everything from putting in, well, I say we, mostly Neil, put in fencing all the way around the farm. He put in hand-built or hand-dug water channels to 230 meters of water harvesting pipes across the hillside. There's a huge amount of effort went into kind of bringing the farm up to a point where we could put animals in and use it as we planned to anyway for our animals.
And did you always have this dream to put the animals in there? Was that always part of the mix?
We decided
I'm going to have X amount of pigs.
We did decide that we were going to leave. Sorry, that's the dog scrabbling. We did decide that we were going to deliberately set up a small holding, kind of see what the good life, whether we could manage the good life. And we celebrated I still got photographs of our first ever meal that we produced, Sunday lunch we produced for ourselves, in its entirety. And that felt a great sense of achievement. But we quickly realised that we were going to have to earn more, you can't, pay for petrol out of potatoes, and you can't sell enough potatoes to run a van for a period of time that can take your animals to market or to slaughter or whatever. So
was A Good Life a television program an inspiration for this then?
Oh, absolutely. Any resemblance between me and Barbara is purely coincidence, obviously.
I loved A Good Life when I was a kid.
Our animals, our two breeding sows, are called Lady Penelope and Margot. Need I say more?
Says it all.
All right, Lady Penelope is from another one, but Penelope Keith is part of it. Yeah.
It must have been really tough to start off with, especially because you didn't have this sort of background, not from the farm background itself.
We went on a course, so we went on a small holding course, and that was very intensive. And we came away with our original starting stock. And she was a lady based up in the northeast of Yorkshire, and very knowledgeable. She'd been an agronomist. She'd then worked as a feed salesperson, which required her going to lots of different farms. So that gives you experience. And then she and her husband set up a 3,000-acre farm in Wales, where you learn even more. And now they still are there, but for a while they set up their small holding and then offered bespoke training. And so we went and did that. And that was really helpful. The very, very first thing they got us to do, Mark, was to go into the 20-something stone ram. Yeah, that's the weight, 20 stone, and weigh his testicles. Because if you dare do that, you dare do the rest of farming,
Yes.
7 pounds.
And did you instantly think, yes, this is for us, or did you think, oh my god,
we'd already bought the place, we hadn't moved in.
Okay.
So we had to do it, didn't we?
Right. I mean, it must have been great fun along the track then, and also doing it with Neil as well.
It's going to make us or break us, put it like that. It was a lot of hard work, and with not a lot. We bought the farm, but we didn't have a lot to spend, and everything you buy in farming is expensive. We don't have a tractor. We do everything by hand. I do the lawns mostly by the hillsides, mostly with a lawnmower. I've got 2 lawnmowers. I've got very heavy lawnmower, and then I've got quite heavy lawnmower. And it's steep, so that's hard work. But it's quite nice to be that connected after being very notebook and pencil oriented and relationship oriented. This was about developing a relationship with the soil and the land, which I knew from the people I worked with in the 2/3 world was possible, and I kind of felt we'd lost it over here.
I'm sorry to stop you earlier, because obviously you were saying you couldn't pay for petrol with a bag of spuds. So let's go back to that bit, if that's okay. So you suddenly realised that you couldn't pay for petrol with a bag of spuds, so you had to do something else. Is that how you came up with the sausage roll idea? Or
I think it was more horrific than that, actually, Mark.
Oh, right. Okay.
It was the point at which I realised that because we have 2 sows, bred them, and so then we have 3 because we have the boar and 2 sows, and they're big. They're really big pigs. They're not small pigs. They're fully grown sows and boar. We're talking 250 to 300 and something kilos. And then they gave birth to 23 little tiny piglets. And then, months went by and we fed them with what money, we kind of managed really well. And at some point, I realised I was not going to get 23. I wasn't even going to get even one of them in a domestic freezer.
Wow. Okay.
And if I didn't do something with them, we were going to have to carry on feeding them. And the bigger they get, the more they eat every day. So I had to, kind of think what to do. And my mother is a very good cook. She's a chef. She's trained herself in cordon bleu. So she taught myself. She taught my children. She used to write some articles as well, on cookery articles. So she taught us to cook, all of us, and then also taught me not to be afraid of quantities,
Wow.
which is a jolly useful skill to impart, quite frankly.
Yes. Well, as an chef, I appreciate that as well. So did you know them? Sorry.
So then we took the first 2 pigs to be slaughtered, I had to work pretty quickly to use the meat. And I started off by making sausage rolls that I took to Colford Country Market. Now, I will shamelessly now plug the country markets. They used to be the WI markets, but they support micro businesses across the country. And I hope one day they ask me to be chairman of them, because I think they should be running classes in schools, teaching youngsters, boys and girls, how to cook, how to do crafts and things, and how to sell them, because they had a very high code of practice in terms of food safety. You had to do courses, you had to prove the quality of your kitchen for doing it, you had to register with the EHO, and then a whole set of guidelines as to what can and can't go into the products, because they stand for natural, good quality, traditional ways of cooking. So jams won't have I'm going to forget the word, stuff that sets jam, pectin put in. You have to put ingredients in that will do it, and so forth. So my mother had been with them previously, and she said, go along to Colford Country Market and find out what they'll do with you, So I joined them, and the very first time, having done all my preparation, I took 90 rolls and I sold one. People in Colford, I could tell you, like to look at things for a week or two, then they'll buy lots. But first of all, they like to see it's sustainable before they get committed. But I needed to sell them because I needed to have the ingredients to make the next lot. So I put them in a basket and I touted them around our village of St Breville's, just knocking on doors. I'm sure that trading standards and EHO would probably say that's not the way to do it. But hey-ho, out of it grew a business which has supported the area. Yeah. And after the very first week, they just said, will you be coming? People were saying, will you be back next week? You bet. But I made other things as well. So what happened within 2 weeks was I would send out an email on a Tuesday saying, this is what I'll be making that you can either collect or have delivered on a Friday. And people would put their orders in on a Wednesday, and I would make it and deliver. And then we decided to do up a little outhouse in well, we needed to, because it grew really quickly. I tell you, it grew really quickly. And beyond...
What sort of timescales when you say really quickly? What
3 months. It was already too big for me legally to do it in the house.
Wow. Okay.
So I had to shut the business. That's not a good business model. I wouldn't give that as an ideal business model, to shut your business while we tried to find funding, because we hadn't had a regular income. So loan was difficult to do up what we now call the pie house, which is a double garage, which had been a domestic dwelling illegally, I think, for a while, but not us, some previous owners. And we did that up as a kind of kitchen cum shop. Our village didn't have a shop. And we put into that our own cooker, our own fridge, our own dishwasher, because we didn't have the money to buy new, but we couldn't cook on domestic, we couldn't cook in the house. So we then had a camping gas stove for 2 years while we grew the business. Wow. And there was a shop, and that grew really quickly. So I started making the sausage rolls in February, and by Christmas we'd got a bespoke unit outside, which was a shop, and we turned over in the shop alone 3,000 a month, which wasn't bad considering we couldn't advertise it, we couldn't put a stand outside it, it had to be like a roadside shop, and because we have a footpath, we could just about squeeze it in planning terms to do that. And it grew really well, but then it grew too big at that point. That's when Gloucester Services said yes, they'd really like to take us on. So we took a bit out of our pension, or rather, to be more specific, dear Neil took it out of his pension, and we bought some ovens, and we did up the first iteration of the pie house based on the estimate made by Tea-Based Services Westmoreland's buyer as to how many he thought we'd sell eventually. So that went in the May of 2014. Yes, it went in the May of 2014, the new iteration of the pie house. And we cooked on that for a year. And then just before the south opened, we had to close that down. We borrowed a kitchen, and we had it refitted with very high-tech professional equipment. So we can't expand the space legally, so we have to make it more intensive. So we have the kinds of cookers that top chefs use in top restaurants. A Rationale, it's called, invested in a specialist kind of pan to cook. We can boil very quickly. We can cook 300 sausage rolls in 20 minutes, 28 minutes.
Wow.
We can blast chill them then, depending on how many are in the blast chiller, within an hour or just over an hour. We can have them cold and ready to pack. So yeah, I mean, that worked pretty well, really. And as we increased our capacity, sales increased. So we spec'd the pie house, which we now work in, for 8,000 products a week. That's what our aim was. And last week, for example, we did 14,000.
Wow.
So it's.
But you also become a wholesaler, don't you? Because you now sell to restaurants and.
Yes, I don't know, I call it a wholesaler, but we business to business. So
yes.
we don't. I mean, we do have one or two places where. So we used to supply direct to Mid Counties Co-op, but now we go through Mudwalls, for example. They supply them. And we supply Cress, which is a distributor, but we actually use a different brand name for that, which is called the Pie House at Cinderhill Farm rather than Cinderhill Farm.
Right. Okay. And then like I said, you sell to pubs as well, and that's the chilled version.
That's frozen unbaked, and then they bake them and they have them fresh, which is the best way. Delicious that way. And we have, I mean, there are some very canny people running businesses like that. So I think the highest margin comes from a pub who will remain nameless, but who have something like a 10% markup by putting lettuce and some very nice chutneys and a slice of bread and things with it. Good luck to them, Innovation.
That sounds like good. That sounds like good business to me.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what it's all about. At the end of the day, they can make a good margin on your product. It says a lot for your product. What would you say was the biggest mistake that you made?
Well, I can tell you because we're currently engaging a solicitor about it. I'm not proud of it, but under extreme pressured selling last autumn, signed an agreement with an energy broker.
Right. Okay.
And we are probably paying. Well, I know because we still have one account in the farm that's with. We were with Bulb, and of course it was in receivership. We didn't know what was going to happen, and we made the mistake of believing somebody who told us that they knew best and they could get us the best deal, and so we're stuck with 96 pence a kilowatt hour, whereas we buy on the other one 37 pence a kilowatt hour at the moment.
Wow. So what's the difference? What was your energy bill then? I think you might have mentioned this in the business.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it depends at which moment in time because it's just gone up. But I think so. This year we'll probably pay about 90,000. A couple of years ago we were on 7,000, and I think we should probably now at today's rates be around 30,000. So we've got a fight on our hands, but it might be 20 years till we get paid back. I guess I don't know how it works, but we have fairly, we believe, clear examples of mis-selling, like telling us that we had no contract with Bulb, like telling us that they wouldn't be able to give us our government discount. We hadn't had a bill from Bulb for a year and a half because they're in such a mess they couldn't issue bills. So we didn't know where we were. We didn't know how much we were using. I had to try and guess what I should put in every month because I didn't want to get into arrears. And that's why I say it's hard to say what our bills actually were. But the broker was telling us, well, I can see your bills, I can see what your usage was. I'll get them for you, don't you worry. And then when eventually, after we'd signed, because they gave us such a 15-minute window of opportunity, if you do sign here, you can get this deal. And the papers, when you print them out, are that thick. You can't read those papers in 15 minutes. Hindsight's a great thing. If somebody's pushing you, don't go for it. Don't go for it. But I did check for one thing because I'd read about small businesses like ours being caught out where the small print says, it's only 17 pence a kilowatt hour, but you're committed to buying, 17, 20 times the energy that you need. And then you've got small business owners losing their business, losing their homes to keep up with payments that they've guaranteed the payment of. So I managed to know that was wrong, but I just, we didn't. It's all too pressurized. In the normal rush of life, sometimes it's difficult to read contracts. I will never sign anything quickly again.
Okay, well, that could be one of your top tips, but we could come back to that because we're not out of time. I just want to go back a little bit, just very quickly. So where are you from originally, Deborah? Where's Neil from?
I was born in Tame, but moved very quickly up to Yorkshire, and I grew up in Yorkshire, really. We moved back down to the home counties when I was a teenager. I was a very, very bad, naughty teenager.
Is that because you're a bit of a maverick? Is that the thing?
I haven't at the moment, but I've had some beautiful, very fast motorcycles. In 1 year, I did 35,000 miles alone on my bike.
Wow.
And I've taken them around many of the tracks in this country.
Is that speed riding?
Yes, I also did the California Superbike cornering courses. I've done level 1 and level 2 of that. You get your knee down.
Fantastic. Anyway, well, we are kind of running out of time already, would you believe it? It always goes so fast through these punchlines. So I've got to ask you, what are you reading? Not I've got to ask you, but I'd like to know, what are you reading at the moment? And also, what are you playing in your car? If I came in your car and turned on your radio, your CD player or whatever you've got, what would be
okay, I listen to audiobooks.
Right, okay.
At one point in my history, I used to work as marketing director for ISIS audiobooks, which produced audiobooks for people who are partially sighted. And I love audiobooks. So that's what I really listen to. But if I've got a big meeting to go to, I love a good bit of loud, hit-bangery music. So I might put on Status Quo or something like that, which just is not my normal common taste. But just kind of get yourself focused.
Is that to get you revved up and ready to go?
But my greatest musical love is, I think, the extraordinary landscape of Peter Gabriel's music. Fantastic. So we went to see him this year. I really enjoy his music. And I enjoy classical music. We go quite often we go over to Wales to St David's Hall and listen to music then when we can as well.
Okay, so what's the book you've got there?
The book I've picked up is The English Path. This was written actually by a friend of mine. This is a second edition, and this is fascinating. It's a walk through literature, ancient and modern, about footpaths. And so the reason I got this one open is because the paths around here, some of it, the Offers Dyke is partly on roads, for example. And our own road was probably once just a footpath. And it was I think it was E.M. Forster, I was looking it up. And it said, basically over time, tarmac has laid down a road on top of what were footpaths where people reigned. And now with that, it's also it's tarmacked over people's rights to walk, and you're squashed into the side. I have a Springer Spaniel who's attempted to join in this interview and covered in scratches. She's a puppy. But, walking is my love. I've walked the length of Norway. Earlier on this year, I walked the Cleveland Way with a dear friend. I walked the Dales where I would walk every day, all day, if I had the opportunity.
I totally agree with you. I'm exactly the same. I love walking as well. I've got to ask you then, as to wrap this up, unfortunately, today. What's your top 3 business tips, Deborah?
I've got 3 very quick ones. It's not going to be don't sign something quickly, because I've said that one. The first one is, I believe that the success for us as being an agile business. So not being stuck in the mud, but if somebody comes along and says, can you do X? Or there's an opportunity, for example, when we were on Country File, the opportunity arose to supply a lot more very quickly to Gloucester services. So being willing to be agile, I think, helps you grow really quickly, because it opens up opportunities, new introductions, and you prove yourself through it. So you build it in a way that saying things can never do. Second one, enjoy it. Why, if you don't enjoy what you're doing, you won't attract people to it, I don't think. So whatever it is, if you're growing your business, make sure it's something that you can enjoy, whether it's because it does something good in the world, or because you like what it produces, or the service it provides makes the difference to people. Whatever, it's fine. Like the job you're doing, enjoy it. You meet people. It has its kernel of pleasure in it somewhere. I certainly enjoyed what you do, and I'm grateful for it. And the third one is generosity, and that comes from my fundraising days. So in my experience, generosity begets generosity, and I hope our sausage rolls will always be thought of as generous sausage rolls.
They are without doubt very filling. And that's a great way to stop. Deborah, thanks ever so much for joining Punchline Talks today, the big interview. Catch you again soon. Thanks very much.
Thank you for having me.
Bye.
Bye.